In August 1975, John Love released 3 white-tailed eagles onto Scottish soil for the first time in 57 years. It was everything that remained of an attempt to return the species to the British Isles, but no miracle came. All 3 died. The project seemed to have failed. Yet 10 years later, the first chick appeared on a neighboring island. 50 years on, 200 breeding pairs and 8 million pounds of tourist revenue a year on just one island. So how did a failed attempt become the beginning of one of the most successful species recoveries in Europe? But first, one detail about August 1975 that is rarely mentioned. Roy Dennis and John Love flew to Norway, climbed into nests, and physically removed 4 eaglets, each larger than a domestic goose. The eaglets were packed into 4 wooden crates. They were then loaded onto a Royal Air Force Nimrod, the British military maritime patrol aircraft of the time, which was stuffed with classified electronic equipment. A classified NATO military aircraft was transporting eagles. That is literally what happened, because no other way was found to move large birds quickly and safely across the North Sea. The aircraft landed at Kinloss on the Scottish coast. From there, they went by road to the port, and by ferry to the island of Rum. Rum is a volcanic island of 104 square kilometers. Hallival Peak is 723 meters above sea level. Peat, cliffs, wild goat, red deer. A few dozen people maintained the nature reserve. There are no roads between settlements. The choice of location was deliberate. There was enough food, fish, rabbits, deer carcasses, and enough distance from sheep and people for the eagles to learn to live independently before encountering the real highlands. 4 crates were unloaded on the shore. 1 was already still. The white-tailed eagle, Haliaeetus albicilla, was once everywhere, along the entire British coastline from Cornwall to the Orkney Islands. It had a wingspan of up to 2.5 meters. The 4th largest eagle in the world. It nested on cliffs, hunted fish, scavenged carrion, and maintained a certain balance in coastal and aquatic ecosystems simply through its presence as an apex predator. Then came gradual and prolonged persecution. First, medieval feudal lords who considered the eagle a threat to domestic poultry. Then the Victorian era with its cult of egg collecting and taxidermy. A single intact egg fetched more than a farmer earned in a week. Scottish naturalist Osgood Mackenzie, founder of Inverurie Gardens and a man who knew the Highlands intimately, left this sentence in his memoirs. When you see 7 eagles in the sky at once, it is time to thin them out a little. This was the norm of the era. Landowners, gamekeepers, shepherds, everyone saw the eagle as a competitor or a threat. It occurred to no one simply not to kill it. Researchers estimate that between 1800 and 1918, more than 100 eagles were destroyed on the Orkney archipelago alone. These are only the cases recorded in shooting journals. How many died without records is unknown. Then came mass land clearance and destruction of coastal forests. Then poison laid in bait by gamekeepers. Then firearms that became cheap and accessible. The eagle reproduces slowly, 1 or 2 eggs a year, with chicks not reaching sexual maturity until 5 years old. Every adult death is 5 years that will not exist. The population could not recover fast enough. In 1800, several hundred pairs in Britain. By 1900, a handful. The last nesting attempt, the Isle of Skye, 1916. 2 years later, in 1918, the last known individual was shot on Shetland, an old albino female, recognized by locals for years. That was the end. The trajectory is familiar from the bald eagle, the national symbol of the United States, which by 1963 had fallen to fewer than 500 breeding pairs in the continental country. Congress passed the Bald Eagle Protection Act. The Endangered Species Act followed, and the population recovered. The difference between the American and Scottish stories is one. The Americans stopped before reaching 0. The Scots did not. When the last bird was shot in 1918, there was no one left to save, only starting from nothing. The first 2 attempts to return the eagle failed before the real program had even begun. In 1959, naturalist Pat Sandeman released 3 eaglets in Argyll. None survived. In 1968, ornithologist Roy Dennis, then a young warden at the Fair Isle Bird Observatory, received 4 eaglets from Norway. 1 vanished without trace. 2, in Dennis's own view, simply flew back to Norway. He never knew for certain, but that was the most likely explanation. The 4th died. Its feathers had become matted with fulmar oil. Fulmars are birds that eagles eat, and when attacked, they regurgitate stomach fluid directly onto the attacker. That fluid is foul-smelling, sticky, and ultimately lethal. From these 2 failures, lessons were drawn. They learned how to transport, how to handle, and where to release. In 1975, the Nature Conservancy Council, together with the RSPB, launched a full program. The island of Rum, volcanic and near uninhabited, and covering 104 square kilometers of peat, cliff, and ocean, became the base. It offered enough food and enough distance from people. But septics were plentiful. The principal argument against was practical. Great Britain is one of the most densely populated corners of Europe. Sheep farming in the Highlands has existed for centuries. An eagle with an 8-foot wingspan and an eagle's appetite would inevitably come into conflict with farmers. And nobody asked the farmers. David Coulthart, a farmer from Appin who would later chair the Argyll and Lochaber Sea Eagle stakeholder group, put it plainly: an apex predator was imposed on us and we were made to live with it. These people had real arguments. They simply couldn't see the full picture. And the full picture assembled very slowly, because even after the program was running, the killing did not stop. According to the RSPB Bird Crime Report, between 2009 and 2023, 1,529 confirmed cases of illegal persecution of raptors were recorded in Britain. Among the victims were white-tailed eagles, poisoned bait, shotguns, destroyed nests. Most crimes occurred on land where pheasant and grouse shooting is conducted. Most remain unsolved because they happen in remote places. In 2022, 2 young eagles from the Isle of Wight project, birds just brought from Scotland to England, were found dead on shooting estates. One was shot. The other was poisoned with 7 times the lethal dose of the rodenticide bromidine. This is precisely why the Scottish population grew more slowly than it could have, because someone was continuing what began in the 18th century. Only now it is a crime. Between 1975 and 1985, 82 eaglets were transported to Rum from Norway, but these 82 birds were a separate operation in themselves. Each year, someone from the team flew to Norway, found a nest with 2 chicks, took one, and left the other, so the Norwegian population would not be harmed. Then transportation, a crate, an aircraft or ferry, an aviary on Rum, a few weeks of acclimatization on a Scottish diet of rabbits and fish. Release and uncertainty. No GPS or satellite tracking. An eagle could fly in any direction and disappear for months. The team only learned whether a bird was surviving if someone saw it and reported it, or if they found it dead. Of the 82 released, approximately 37% survived to sexual maturity. For the reintroduction of a large predator, that is a normal figure, but it means more than half the birds carried across the North Sea in wooden crates simply vanished. The first years, nothing. Eagles flew across the Highlands, disappeared for weeks, appeared again, but did not nest. The reason was simple: sexual maturity arrives at 5 years. Birds released in 1975 physically could not nest before 1980, and only then if they found a partner. 1983, the Isle of Mull, the first clutch of eggs, but they did not hatch. 1985, Mull again. The first chick fledged. The first white-tailed eagle born in the wild in Britain for 70 years. That first chick of 1985 had a mother. She was called Blondie, a field name from the RSPB team for her lighter plumage. Blondie became the first female eagle to successfully raise a chick in wild Britain after 7 decades of the species' absence. A specific bird at a specific nest on the Isle of Mull, watched, photographed, guarded around the clock because no one knew whether it would happen again. It did. Blondie had a daughter. She was named Frisa after a loch near the nest on Mull. Frisa hatched in 1992. In 1997, she found a partner named Sky. Together they nested on Mull for 28 years. Together they raised 25 chicks. In 2005, Frisa and Sky appeared on BBC Springwatch, with 2 chicks that viewers named Scratchy and Itchy. From that moment, these 2 eagles became perhaps the most famous birds in Great Britain. They appeared on Springwatch, Autumn Watch, Winter Watch, Blue Peter, and Country File. Friesa died in 2024. She was 32 years old. Dave Sexton, the RSPB officer who had been watching her since 1984, wrote, "I had dreaded the day I would arrive at her nest and not find her there. That day came." This is what 75 eaglets from Norway and 40 years of patience gave the Isle of Mull, a bird the whole of Britain knew, and her 25 descendants, who now nest somewhere in those same mountains. The population grew slowly, too slowly. By 2000, only 22 breeding pairs. Then a second wave was launched. Between 1993 and 1998, another 56 birds were released in Wester Ross. Between 2007 and 2012, 85 birds were released in eastern Scotland, in Fife. In 2013, the first successful nesting in eastern Scotland took place. For the first time in nearly 200 years, an eagle nested in the east of the country. This is where the question arises that anyone who has watched Yellowstone documentaries will recognize. In 1995, Americans returned wolves to Yellowstone. The early years seemed to show something extraordinary. Wolves pressured elk grazed less along riverbanks, vegetation recovered, beavers returned, rivers changed course. The concept of the trophic cascade emerged, a chain reaction from the apex predator down through the entire food pyramid. Then the science became more complicated. A 2024 Colorado State University study showed that data on willow recovery had been overstated due to methodological errors. The cascade happened, but not as clean or as fast as the headlines had promised. The white-tailed eagle in Scotland is a similar situation. It is an apex predator in a coastal system. It exerts pressure on fish numbers, on seabird populations, on how and where deer graze near the coast. But measuring this is difficult. The connections exist, but reality is more complex. And here is where that complexity becomes most visible. The heart of this story is not that the eagles came back. It is that the return did three things nobody planned. The first, the eagle rewrote the economy of an island. The Isle of Mull in 1985. 3,000 residents, a few hotels, tourism infrastructure as a secondary income alongside fishing and sheep farming. After the first nesting, people started arriving. Birdwatchers, photographers, tourists who simply wanted to see Britain's largest bird of prey alive. The RSPB conducted the first economic study in 2005. Result: £3 to £5 million in annual tourist turnover, 64 to 108 jobs. In 2022, a third study, independent, verified by external experts. Between £4.9 and £8 million annually, between 98 and 160 permanent jobs. 29% of tourists in 2019 named the eagles as the primary reason for visiting Mull. It is generally assumed that conservation is a cost. Mull proved the opposite, but this doesn't mean the eagle and sheep farming became friends. Here is a concrete detail of what compromise looks like in practice. On Mull, there is a farmer, Jamie McLean. His land sits near one of the eagle nests. For several years running, he reported losses. Eagles raising chicks on his lambs. In spring, when eagles are raising chicks, and in spring when his ewes are lambing, these two seasons overlap perfectly. From the eagle's perspective, NatureScott and the RSPB proposed a solution that sounds like something from the Iron Age: diversionary feeding. The Scottish government pays the farmer money. The farmer buys fish from a local fishmonger at retail price and places the fish on a special mound in the middle of the field. So the eagles eat fish instead of lambs. This works, partially. When eagles take the fish, the number of attacks on lambs in that season falls, but not to zero, and the program requires annual renewal, annual negotiations, annual payments. In 2023, the Scottish government spent over £900,000 supporting farmers and crofters under the Sea Eagle Management Scheme. Compensation, protective measures, enhanced monitoring during lambing. £900,000 in fish on a mound. This is what coexistence looks like 27 years after Blondie's first chick. The second, the skeptics turned out to be right too. NatureScott, the official agency, states plainly, in some locations, white-tailed eagles hunt live healthy lambs, and the impact on farmers' livelihoods can be significant. Scientific studies show that most lamb remains found in nests are carrion. Birds had collected already dead animals, but not always. Farmer Coulthart documented real losses over decades. The Scottish government spends hundreds of thousands of pounds annually on compensation schemes for farmers and crofters. Dave Sexton, RSPB officer on Mull since 1984, says it directly. He never denied that eagles take lambs, and not only sick ones. A newborn lamb is easy prey. An eagle makes no distinction, but he adds, losses are concentrated around a small number of nests in specific pairs. Most eagles don't touch lambs. This is a complex picture in which both sides are telling the truth, just not all of it. The third, the most important, nobody was asked. When the first birds were brought to Rum in 1975, there were no public consultations with local communities. The decision was made by scientists and conservationists. People who had lived and worked in those mountains for generations found out after the fact. Domhnall McSween, a farmer from Lewis, 70% of Scots want rewilding, but those voices come from cities, from people who don't know what it means to live off the land. He may be overstating it, but on one thing he is plainly right: the process could have been more honest from the beginning. And the price of that dishonesty is decades of mutual suspicion between farmers and conservationists that has not disappeared. The eagle population grows at 8 to 10% per year. The birds are expanding their range. There are already pairs in the Cairngorms, on Orkney, birds regularly appearing on Shetland. Nature Scott in 2025 speaks of sustainable coexistence of eagles and sheep farming. The Farmers Union responds that progress on the ground is limited. Both are right, and meanwhile, the Scottish experiment has already launched its own subsidiary project. Since 2019, Roy Dennis and Forestry England have been transporting young eagles from Scottish nests to the Isle of Wight in England. The same birds, descendants of the same Norwegian eaglets of 1975. By August 2025, 45 individuals had been released. In 2023, the first chick appeared in Sussex, the first in England since the 18th century. In 2025, already 6 wild chicks in 2 counties. And here's the key difference. In England, every bird has a GPS tag. Every suspected attack on livestock can be checked against satellite tracking within hours. Over 6 years of the project, 0 confirmed attacks on live lambs. This means conditions differ. Different sheep density, different type of pasture, different experience of specific birds. But it also means when there is data, the argument becomes more specific. Less eagles are killing our lambs versus no they aren't. And more, this bird, this time, these coordinates. Perhaps that is precisely the lesson Scotland gave England about how to have the conversation. The white-tailed eagle in Scotland is a similar situation. It is an apex predator in a coastal system. It exerts pressure on fish numbers, on seabird populations, on how and where deer graze near the coast. But measuring this is difficult. The connections exist, but reality is more complex. And here is where that complexity becomes most visible. The heart of this story is not that the eagles came back. It is that the return did 3 things nobody planned. The first, the eagle rewrote the economy of an island. The Isle of Mull in 1985. 3,000 residents, a few hotels, tourism infrastructure as a secondary income alongside fishing and sheep farming. After the first nesting, people started arriving. Birdwatchers, photographers, tourists who simply wanted to see Britain's largest bird of prey alive. The RSPB conducted the first economic study in 2005. Result: £3 to £5 million in annual tourist turnover, 64 to 108 jobs. In 2022, a third study, independent, verified by external experts. Between £4.9 and £8 million annually, between 98 and 160 permanent jobs. 29% of tourists in 2019 named the eagles as the primary reason for visiting Mull. It is generally assumed that conservation is a cost. Mull proved the opposite, but this doesn't mean the eagle and sheep farming became friends. Here is a concrete detail of what compromise looks like in practice. On Mull, there is a farmer, Jamie McLean. His land sits near one of the eagle nests. For several years running, he reported losses. Eagles raising chicks on his lambs. In spring, when eagles are raising chicks, and in spring when his ewes are lambing, these 2 seasons overlap perfectly. From the eagle's perspective, Nature Scott and the RSPB proposed a solution that sounds like something from the Iron Age: diversionary feeding. The Scottish government pays the farmer money. The farmer buys fish from a local fishmonger at retail price and places the fish on a special mound in the middle of the field. So the eagles eat fish instead of lambs. This works, partially. When eagles take the fish, the number of attacks on lambs in that season falls, but not to 0, and the program requires annual renewal, annual negotiations, annual payments. In 2023, the Scottish government spent over £900,000 supporting farmers and crofters under the Sea Eagle Management Scheme. Compensation, protective measures, enhanced monitoring during lambing. 900,000 pounds in fish on a mound. This is what coexistence looks like 27 years after Blondie's first chick. The second, the skeptics turned out to be right too. NatureScott, the official agency, states plainly, in some locations, white-tailed eagles hunt live healthy lambs, and the impact on farmers' livelihoods can be significant.